The summer sun blazed down on Maplewood Estates, a suburban neighborhood that always looked picture-perfect on the outside but carried layers of tension beneath the surface. It was the kind of place where manicured lawns, freshly painted fences, and carefully trimmed hedges gave an illusion of peace and order. Behind that order, however, stood the Homeowners Association, an HOA that prided itself on rules, regulations, and absolute control. Among the strictest rules was one that every resident knew by heart. The community pool must remain closed after noon until evening. The HOA board had argued endlessly about this policy, citing reasons like maintenance, safety, and liability. Some residents quietly questioned it, but no one dared to openly challenge the board, at least, not until that scorching afternoon in July. On that day, the heat was unbearable. The asphalt shimmered, dogs barked lazily under shaded porches, and not a single breeze moved through the still air. For 15-year-old Ryan Miller, the temptation of the pool was simply too much. His family had just moved into Maplewood 2 months ago, and he hadn't yet learned how seriously the HOA enforced its rules. To him, the pool was a place to escape the suffocating heat, not a battleground of neighborhood politics. So when the clock struck 12 and most of the residents disappeared indoors, Ryan snuck through the iron gate, tossed his towel on a lounge chair, and dove headfirst into the shimmering blue water. The splash echoed across the silent pool area, water droplets catching sunlight like tiny diamonds. For a few minutes, it was paradise. He swam lap after lap, the water cooling his overheated skin. He floated on his back, staring up at the cloudless sky, unaware that he was being watched. From across the street, Margaret Thompson, one of the longest-standing HOA board members, had noticed the movement at the pool. Margaret was in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She considered herself the guardian of Maplewood's order, the enforcer of rules, and the protector of community standards. The moment she saw Ryan in the water, her jaw tightened. "Unbelievable," she muttered, slamming her glass of iced tea onto the porch railing. She stormed across the street, her sandals slapping against the pavement. Each step fueled by outrage, Margaret felt her pulse quicken. By the time she reached the pool gate, she was already fuming. She yanked the metal gate open, letting it screech on its hinges, and her voice sliced through the quiet afternoon. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Ryan jerked upright in the water, startled. Drops ran down his face as he blinked at the furious woman looming over him. I'm just swimming," he stammered, confused. Margaret's eyes widened with disbelief. "Just swimming? Do you have any idea what time it is? The pool is closed after noon. It's against the rules. Every resident knows that." Ryan swam to the edge, gripping the side of the pool. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I thought it was fine. There's no one here." "That's exactly the point," Margaret snapped, her voice rising. "The rules exist for a reason. Do you think you're special? Do you think you can just do whatever you want?" Her shouting carried through the neighborhood, and soon blinds shifted in nearby houses. A few curious neighbors peeked out, whispering to each other as the scene unfolded. Ryan felt his cheeks burn, partly from embarrassment and partly from anger. He didn't mean to break any rule, but the way Margaret scolded him in front of everyone made him feel like a criminal. "I wasn't hurting anyone," Ryan protested. "It's just swimming." Margaret jabbed a finger toward him. "Don't you dare argue with me. I've lived here for 20 years, young man. I know exactly what happens when people like you think the rules don't matter. Next thing you know, the whole neighborhood falls apart." Her words struck harder than intended, echoing across the stillness of the street. Ryan's fists tightened on the pool's edge. His chest rose and fell as he struggled to contain his frustration. From across the fence, someone finally spoke up. "Margaret, calm down," called Mr. Hernandez, a neighbor who had been trimming his bushes. "He's just a kid, maybe he didn't know." But Margaret was already too worked up to listen. She pulled her phone out of her pocket with trembling hands and declared, "If you won't respect the rules, then the police will make you. I'm calling them right now." Ryan's eyes widened. "What, you're calling the police for swimming?" "You bet I am," she hissed. "No one ignores the HOA and gets away with it." The boy felt trapped, half in the water, half out, the world's judgment pressing down on him. He wished his parents were home to defend him, but they were away at work. Alone, he could only watch as Margaret dialed the number with dramatic flair, making sure the neighbors saw every second of it. The oppressive heat seemed to grow heavier, pressing on everyone's shoulders as the minutes dragged. The once quiet afternoon had become a stage for conflict, and the whole neighborhood was the audience. By the time the distant wail of sirens approached, Ryan's heart thudded in his chest. He climbed out of the pool, water dripping onto the hot concrete, and wrapped his towel tightly around himself. Margaret folded her arms triumphantly as if she had already won. "Now you'll see what happens when you break the rules." As the police car rolled up and stopped in front of the pool, the neighbors who had been watching from their windows stepped outside, drawn by the drama. The air was thick with tension, curiosity, and judgment. The officer who stepped out, Officer Daniels, was a tall man with a calm demeanor. He adjusted his sunglasses, scanning the small crowd before focusing on Margaret, who immediately marched toward him like a prosecutor presenting her case. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she began dramatically. This reckless boy was swimming in the pool after hours. The rules clearly state the pool is closed after noon, and he blatantly ignored them. I demand you take action." Ryan clenched his jaw, feeling his pulse race. He looked at the officer, hoping for some sign of understanding, but Officer Daniels' expression remained unreadable. The neighborhood had turned silent now, every resident hanging on the officer's response. The heat, the silence, the glares, it all pressed down on Ryan, who suddenly realized this wasn't just about swimming anymore. It was about power, control, and the unspoken war between residents and the HOA. And for the first time, Ryan understood. He had stumbled into something much bigger than he imagined. The air felt like it was vibrating with heat and tension. Every pair of eyes in Maplewood seemed to be locked on the scene at the pool. A boy wrapped in a dripping towel. A furious HOA enforcer clutching her phone, and now a uniformed officer standing between them. It was the kind of spectacle that neighbors would whisper about for weeks. Officer Daniels removed his sunglasses, his steady gaze shifting between Margaret and Ryan. "All right," he said evenly, "let's slow things down. What exactly is the situation here?" Margaret stepped forward, her chin raised in righteous indignation. "The situation, officer, is very simple. This boy was breaking the rules of our community pool. The HOA clearly states that the pool must be closed after noon. He was swimming blatantly, arrogantly, without permission. If we allow this kind of behavior, then everything falls apart. I want you to make sure he understands the consequences." Ryan's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to shout back, to defend himself, but the stern presence of the officer held him in place. Still, he found his voice shaky but determined. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble," Ryan said. "It was so hot and no one was here. I didn't even know about the rule. I just wanted to swim." The officer studied the boy for a moment, then turned back to Margaret. "Ma'am, this sounds like a community issue, not a criminal one." Margaret's mouth fell open. "Not a criminal issue. He violated our bylaws. He disrespected the entire neighborhood. Don't you see what's happening? If one person breaks a rule, soon everyone thinks they can. That's how chaos begins." Her voice grew louder with every word, echoing off the houses. The neighbors who had gathered shifted uncomfortably, some siding with her intensity, others shaking their heads at the spectacle. "Margaret, you're overreacting," shouted Mr. Hernandez from across the street. "He's a kid, the rules aren't laws." Margaret spun around, her face flushed with anger. "Overreacting? Do you think I spend hours every week keeping this community in order for nothing? Do you think I enjoy being the bad guy? Someone has to care about the standards we all agreed to." Ryan tightened his towel, his voice rising this time. "But it's just swimming. I didn't hurt anyone. Why are you treating me like a criminal?" The crowd murmured in agreement, and the divide between Margaret and the rest of the neighbors grew sharper. Officer Daniels raised his hand, trying to restore calm. "Everyone, let's keep our voices down. Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but technically this isn't a matter for law enforcement unless property was damaged or a crime committed." Margaret's eyes blazed. "So what, you're just going to let him off with nothing, no punishment, no accountability?" Daniels exhaled slowly, clearly trying to keep his patience. "Ma'am, my job is not to enforce HOA rules. My job is to enforce the law. If you have an issue with residents violating bylaws, you need to bring it up at your board meeting or fine the family. But I'm not arresting a teenager for swimming." That statement struck the crowd like a thunderclap. Some neighbors clapped softly while others whispered, their voices carrying hints of relief and vindication. Ryan felt a rush of gratitude, though his chest still trembled with nerves. But Margaret wasn't done. She stepped closer to the officer, her voice dropping into a furious hiss. Do you understand what kind of message this sends? That rules mean nothing, that the HOA is powerless. Ma'am, Daniel said firmly, I think the bigger problem here is the shouting. You're disturbing the peace far more than this boy was. Gasps rippled through the crowd. For the first time, Margaret's authority had been directly challenged, not by a neighbor she could intimidate, but by a figure of authority she couldn't control. Her face turned crimson. Disturbing the peace, me? I'm the only one keeping peace in this neighborhood. Ryan, emboldened by the officer's words, stepped forward. Maybe peace isn't about yelling at people for every little mistake. Maybe it's about treating each other like neighbors instead of criminals. The murmurs grew louder, some neighbors nodding, others whispering about how Margaret had always gone too far. Suddenly, another voice cut through the crowd. Mrs. Keller, a mother of 3, stepped forward with her arms crossed. Margaret, last week you screamed at my daughter for leaving her bike on the sidewalk. The week before, you left a warning note on the Johnsons' door because their grass was half an inch too tall. We're tired of it. Her words sparked more voices from the crowd. She fined me for painting my shutters the wrong shade of blue. She threatened to tow my car when it was parked overnight on the street. She made my kids cry over sidewalk chalk. The accusations poured out, years of pent-up resentment bubbling over in the heat of the afternoon. Margaret's authority, once feared, was now collapsing under the weight of collective anger. Her hands shook as she pointed at the boy again. This is exactly what I was trying to prevent: disorder, rebellion, chaos. But Ryan, standing in front of the crowd, no longer looked like a troublemaker. He looked like a symbol, someone who had unintentionally exposed the cracks in the HOA's rule of fear. Officer Daniels placed his sunglasses back on, his calm voice cutting through the noise. All right, I think I've heard enough. This is clearly a community dispute and it's not a matter for the police. My advice, work this out like adults, not by yelling in the middle of the street. He gave Margaret a long, meaningful look before returning to his car. The engine roared to life and the squad car pulled away, leaving behind an even heavier silence than before. The crowd turned back to Margaret, their expressions no longer filled with fear but with frustration, even defiance. For the first time in years, Margaret realized she had lost control of her audience. And standing there, towel draped over his shoulders, Ryan realized something else. This wasn't the end of the conflict. It was only the beginning. The silence after the police car pulled away was almost deafening. The neighbors stood scattered around the pool, their eyes fixed on Margaret, who had just watched her authority crumble in front of everyone. Her face was flushed, her breathing uneven, but her pride wouldn't allow her to retreat. She jabbed a finger toward Ryan again. Don't think this is over. You embarrassed me and you embarrassed this community. I'll see to it that your family is fined, and if you keep this up, you'll regret ever moving here. Ryan's jaw tightened, but before he could reply, Mrs. Keller spoke up again. No, Margaret, we're the ones who regret letting you bully us for so long. A wave of agreement rippled through the crowd. Voices that had been silent for years now rose, emboldened by each other. She's right, shouted Mr. Hernandez. You act like you own this place, Margaret, but you don't. We're sick of the yelling, the threats. The notes taped to our doors. The crowd's anger swelled like a storm. For the first time, Margaret looked small, her authority dissolving in the collective voice of her neighbors. She tried to shout over them, but her words were drowned out by their frustration. Ryan stepped forward, his voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through him. All I wanted was to swim. I didn't know the rule. But even if I did, does that mean I deserve to be screamed at in front of everyone? Does that mean you call the police on me like I'm a criminal? The boy's words hung in the hot summer air, piercing deeper than any angry shout could. The neighbors grew quiet, their eyes shifting from him to Margaret. Margaret's lips trembled. For years, she had thrived on fear, on people being too scared or too polite to challenge her. But now, confronted by a united community, she realized the fear had turned into resentment. You don't understand, she said, her voice cracking slightly. If we don't have rules, we lose control. Without control, everything falls apart. Mr. Hernandez shook his head. No, Margaret, we're not asking to get rid of rules, we're asking for respect. There's a difference. Another neighbor chimed in. Rules should help us, not turn us against each other. Exactly, added Mrs. Keller. The pool rule makes no sense in this heat. Maybe it's time to change it instead of punishing people for being human. Ryan looked around, astonished. In defending himself, he had sparked something bigger, a conversation the community had been too afraid to start. Margaret's eyes darted around, searching for support, but the faces staring back at her were no longer fearful. They were firm, resolute. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, she had no power in her words. The crowd slowly began to disperse, murmuring about change, about holding a meeting, about finally addressing the HOA's rules and the way they were enforced. Ryan's heart still raced, but relief washed over him. He hadn't wanted a fight, yet somehow he had stood up not just for himself but for the entire neighborhood. As he picked up his towel and started toward home, Mrs. Keller placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't let her scare you, Ryan. You did nothing wrong. In fact, you did something good today." He nodded, still processing everything that had happened. The boy who had just wanted to cool off in the pool had unknowingly lit the spark of a neighborhood rebellion. Across the street, Margaret lingered, her posture stiff, her pride wounded. She watched the neighbors walk away, whispering plans without including her. For the first time in years, she wasn't the center of control, she was on the outside. The sun dipped lower in the sky, the heat finally beginning to ease, but the weight of change still hung heavy in the air. Maplewood Estates would never be quite the same again. That night, Ryan lay in bed replaying the afternoon in his mind. He thought about the shouting, the embarrassment, the fear of the police car pulling up. But he also thought about the moment when the neighbors spoke up, when voices joined together to push back against unfairness. He realized something powerful. Sometimes rules weren't about safety, they were about control. And sometimes the only way to change things was to stand up, even when you felt small and powerless. The next morning, flyers appeared on every door in the neighborhood. Emergency HOA meeting, topic, pool rules and community conduct. Ryan smiled when he saw the paper on his family's doorstep. For the first time since moving to Maplewood, he felt hopeful. Margaret, sitting alone in her kitchen, stared at the same flyer with a heavy heart. She knew the battle ahead would be different this time. The community had found its voice, and it had started with a boy in a swimming pool on the hottest day of the year. And whether she liked it or not, the days of ruling by fear were over.